Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. This is a show where we talk about how to change our lives by changing our thoughts. And every week I bring you a new guest with new perspectives, new ideas, and really new ways of looking at the world. And my guest this week is Abigail Olson. And Abigail is the author of the book, The Hay Wagon. And you'll hear me talk about in this interview how much I loved this book and really how Abigail was able to tell her story in such a short and concise way, but a way that was totally relatable. And in this conversation, and really what I felt I got out of Abigail's book was a handful of things. Permission about finding a way to empower ourselves, even if it's an unusual or unconventional path. Perseverance about moving towards what you want in life, even if people are trying to discourage you or if it feels like nobody else is doing it. But then also inspiring, to really inspire you to go after what's calling you in this world. So I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. So I'm going to get on to the interview with Abigail Olson, author of the book, The Hay Wagon. The Hay Wagon is a young woman's memoir about getting her CDL and going through her first serious relationship. The book was included on the National Coalition of Girls' Schools 2020-2021 Books of Interest list for grades 9 to 12. And Abigail's book is also a Next Generation Indie Book Award finalist in the Women's Issues, Nonfiction, and Short Story Collection categories. So Abigail, I want to welcome you to the show. I'm so excited that you're here.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and your book, The Hay Wagon.
So I'm Abigail, and this is my first book, and I wrote it, just kind of when I was in a tough spot, trying to figure things out, and I ended up wanting to share it with people.
Yeah, well, and I loved your book because it was so relatable. Like, even I've never, not necessarily personally wanting to get my CDL, but really wanting something in life, right? And having those two storylines, right, with you deciding you wanted to go a certain direction with your life and get your CDL, and then also the struggles with the relationship, because that to me was, even though your chapters were short, they were very concise and very to the point. They told the story. And I think most people being in a relationship, especially women growing up, can totally relate to that. I thought you did a very good job with that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So for those who maybe are new to you, new to the book, one of the main storylines, as we mentioned, was after graduating from high school, you wanted to get your CDL and that commercial driver's license. And so that would enable you to drive larger trucks, semis, dump trucks, things of that nature. So why that? Why that route? Why was that appealing to you? And why is that something you wanted to go after?
I think it seemed really badass and really tough a little bit, but also something that could be relaxing, like being on the road relaxes me. And so it seemed like a great combination of a helpful skill and a tough skill, but also something that I can relax into.
Yeah. Well, and as you describe in your book, and what I love also about your story is that non-conventional choice. You chose something that women don't usually choose, and you went for it. And you got a lot of, people saying, why are you doing that? Are you really going to do that? People trying to talk you out of it, but you didn't listen. You went on your way and went after the thing that you wanted. And so what was that like for you when people were trying to discourage you, or, you ran into some problems that you describe in your book where maybe things didn't go the way you planned? What was that experience like for you?
It was definitely difficult because I felt like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have tried it, but yeah. I'm glad I did, because now I know, and I still have that skill, and well, sort of. And so it just, it was
Well, it almost seems like, as you describe in the book, like it gave you confidence in other areas of your life. Like making that choice helped you to be confident in some other areas of your life.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. Yes,
Yeah.
that's definitely true. Yeah.
And so we have like I said, the two tracks, the going after the thing you want, and then also the relationship part of the story, which
Mm-hmm.
some parts of that, as I was reading them, they were a little difficult because what you went through was tough. That's tough stuff, right? That we deal with, as women. I think we deal with when we're younger because we've never experienced this before. What was that like for you to relive those parts of your life when you were writing the story? Was it tough for you? Did it feel more therapeutic maybe, or what was that like?
Yes, it was definitely therapeutic, and it really helped me figure out what was kind of happening because at the time I was just so confused and I was in this just really bad mental state and I didn't know what was going on. And then, um, really, what kind of inspired the book that I wrote was a different book called Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was reading that and going, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happened. This was what was going on. Like, oh, this makes so much more sense now. And so it was actually really helpful to kind of make sense of what
Yeah.
wasn't really making sense before.
Yeah, and the interesting part of the way you told the story, I thought too, was that was being driven. His behavior a lot seemed to be coming from the way his dad was acting. So it was this
Mhm.
generational thing being carried down. And sometimes it seemed like maybe he didn't know why he was doing it, but he was doing it because that's what he saw his dad do. And then you're left confused too, because you're like, why are you doing this one day and then doing that the next day, right? It doesn't make any sense. And those things are so difficult. I mean, I'd like to tell you they get easier as you get older, but I don't know that that's true. We just have more understanding of what's going on and we maybe know when to exit sooner. But I thought that the way you described that was very, like, as I said, very relatable and very truthful on such tough topics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And so there's a part in your book where everything kind of falls apart and you go to Mexico and again everybody's telling you, why are you doing this, trying to discourage you. Tell us what that was like for you.
So yeah, that was a very tough day for me. I was sitting in an interview with a trucking company who wanted to give me a chance, but I was still too young, but they were trying to work with it. And I just realized I didn't want to force being in in the trucking industry anymore. And so I just was like, okay, I think I can't take this job. And then I looked down at my phone and I got a text from my boyfriend at the time saying like he was breaking up with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like my entire world is falling apart. Like
Right.
I'm like, these were this both of these things I saw in my future, and now I don't have any of either one.
Right.
And so I took the next flight to Mexico, and um, yeah, I think some people questioned it a little bit, but I think most of my friends, I mean, I was 19 at the time, so most of my friends were just like, "Oh, that's so cool, that's awesome."
Right.
Just did that, yeah. So
Right. And so
yeah.
you write about that time, about that time you took for yourself to give yourself space from life, right? Like what was going on with the relationship, what was going on, like things weren't working out with the job. And that was, I think, another really interesting part of your story about the reason why you couldn't get a job was because of your age. You were 18 at the time, 19,
I was
and
15 when I got it, and
okay.
then yeah.
And so you had to be 21 in order to actually get a job driving a truck. And so you actually wrote a letter and you had some part in voicing in legislation. Is that right? Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes. So when I um, was 18, I realized I couldn't get any jobs, and there were two parts to not being able to get a job at that age. The first is that federal regulations, you can't cross state lines if you're under 21 in a commercial vehicle like a
Mm-hmm.
tractor trailer or a dump truck or something. And the other one is insurance. Usually doesn't cover young drivers,
Mm-hmm.
especially with something that big. So, but I decided to kind of tackle the um, regulation, the legal part, because I was talking with a trade association at the time, and they were thinking that if the law changed, then insurance companies would follow just because there's so much pressure.
Right.
So I just wrote a letter or I guess a little story, I guess, in the Richmond Times Dispatch. And so then I ended up being flown to speak in DC to some of the trade association members and some
And
of
so
the.
did that have an impact? Have the laws changed or?
I think I've heard that they are testing 18 to 20-year-olds driving interstate. So I'm not sure what's happening with that, but I do think they are testing that.
Yeah. And so your story was one, and it's always interesting what they will allow you to do at 18 and sometimes force you to do at 18, such as
Mm-hmm.
be drafted in the military, if that, but then there's other things they take away from you at 18. And so it's always interesting, like okay, so why can I do this, but not that? And the military, for example, you could be in the military and have to be driving heavy equipment, who knows where, right? But because you were here and that, so that's always it's a mixed message there of how that's treated. And I think that, your willingness to tell your story and be able to go speak on that, I'm sure that, that especially in a more male dominated industry, I think that's very encouraging, especially for other women listening and, maybe people who are listening that are wanting to move into more unconventional career paths, but maybe feel like it's impossible to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope it encourages people to what they want to do.
Like what you hear so far? Take what you've learned and invest in yourself with the Create What You Speak Academy. Visit createwhatyouspeak.com to learn more. Now back to the show. After reading your book, I don't want to give the ending away because I thought the ending was just perfect how you wrote it. But so what's been happening with you? What's next for you in your life?
Right now I'm just a freelance writer, and I've been working a lot with like tech companies and tech startups explaining kind of their technology. So I've ended up more in the writing, which even though now I'm over 21, I've been enjoying the writing.
Yeah.
in my
So no
life.
more truck driving?
I don't think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I think about it a lot, but it's definitely a skill you have to keep up. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not as much of a learning curve, but some again. And so I don't know. We'll see. I'm
Yeah.
definitely not taking it fully off the table, but
Yeah.
not on it right now. Yeah.
Well, and that's a good thing about doing that. You've got the choice, right? It's something you can always go back to if you want to, but you're not, tied to it necessarily, but it is an option. And I think always having options is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
So what's the feedback been like for your book? I know I mentioned at the beginning the awards you've gotten, and how did that feel to get those awards?
Oh, it felt so great and validating. Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah. And so for those that have read your book, what kind of feedback have they given you?
A lot of them. So the actually what I have found most interesting is that fathers with daughters like around middle school or high school age, they're like, my daughters have got to read this. And so I think that's been really interesting that I like that it's spoken to that demographic because
Yeah.
I didn't really expect it to. But then I will also have people come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, that happened to me or whatever. And some people, what I really like is that people are like, oh, that's so badass or
Yeah.
whatever. And so,
Yeah.
and inspiring and whatever. So, yeah, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback, which has been nice. And yeah.
Yeah, and that encouragement and I'm a lot older than you, but that even I felt that way too, that encouragement, that reminder of empowerment, because we all go through, it seems like we go through different stages where sometimes maybe you'll feel really empowered and other times you feel like no power at all, right? And what I also really enjoyed about your book is those unexpected places we can feel empowered. Like you talk about at the end of the book about being able to drive the hay wagon at your family event and the little boy, interacting with you, and these different ways that, when we go after the thing we want, and we just get over the voices, we get over our own insecurities, and we just go after the thing that we want. There's so much empowerment in that, but then it comes in other ways, in unexpected ways, like feedback or interactions with other people or inspiring other people. And I really love that your book was a great reminder of that too.
Oh, yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah.
So what advice do you have for new writers who are just getting started, maybe people who want to tell their story like you did, and you've been writing more now, and what advice would you have for those just getting started?
I'm not going to really say anything new here, but just keep reading and writing. I think at the time that I was reading more. I'd kind of stopped reading during high school, but I had rediscovered that love of reading, and I really think that helped me with my writing. Well, I know it helped me with my writing. And so I think, it's easy to forget the reading aspect is also really important, along with just keep writing.
Yeah. And your book is written in short, like I said, also short but very concise chapters. Why did you decide to write that way versus maybe more long with a lot of details?
I started trying to write long with a lot of details, and then I just realized it was too big of a project for me a little bit. And so I was kind of tricking my brain a little bit to be like, well, I would just write the story that I wanted to write, and then I'd write another little short moment that I wanted to write. And eventually there was this collection, and then once I took a step back from the collection, I would then take some away. There were a lot that I took away, and then I'd be like, well, what would fill out this theme more? What would fill out this theme more? And just kind of picking moments to write about. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Was it hard to remember the moments? Because it seemed like the way you described some things are very detailed, and very much like could paint the picture or set the scene.
Mm-hmm. I think generally I have a pretty good memory, so it actually wasn't too hard for me to remember it. Sometimes, this is where I'm definitely glad there was an editor to like tell me like when things were missing, and then I would have to just sit back and pretend I'm back in the moment and write. And then so her questions really helped me be like, oh, I guess that detail was important or would be nice to know or whatever. So
yeah. And so when you were going through the writing process, what surprised you the most?
What surprised me the most? Like actually writing it or the whole like publishing process?
Any of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe, maybe nothing did surprise you, but I like that question because it seems like we always learn something about ourselves when we do something big like this, right? Telling our story, and especially such a personal story. For me, I've always found the voice in my head tries to tell me nobody cares, nobody's going to listen, all of this stuff. And then I still want to proceed forward with whatever I'm doing. And so that can be a tough battle in your mind, but then when you come out on the other side of that, it's like, wow, I did this, like that's how I felt. I'm not sure if it was the same for you, but that's what
I was young, like I was 19. So I was like, obviously people are going to care. And so I just kind of, now I think I'm like, oh, maybe people don't care. So I don't bring it up that much. But at the time I was so full of confidence. And maybe the biggest surprise was how personal the editing felt. So like editing is always hard, but then because it's a personal story, it felt really personal. Like she was editing me and my personality.
Yeah.
And then would have to take a step back and be like, okay, well, no. Or I'd be like, that's not what I meant. Like, can you just read it how I meant it? And then it's just like,
Yeah.
well, no, like, but that's how I wrote it. So if I didn't write it how I meant to write it, then I need to rewrite it so it's what I meant.
Yeah.
So that was surprising. But
Yeah. And there's a lot in that too, right? About being willing to be open to that kind of feedback, being willing to accept it and do something with it. And especially on a project, a big project, you've already spent a lot of time on it. So when you get to the end, it's kind of like, oh, I'm kind of done with this. I don't want to have to keep, doing this, but you have to keep doing it because it's not actually done until it's actually done. And so there's a lot there, personally, with being able to not take it personally. Like you said, it's not an attack on you personally. It's simply the story. And so that others can read it in a way that, makes sense to them, not being there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So who would you say your book would appeal to and why?
As I was writing, I kind of envisioned kind of high school age girls reading it, and I really envisioned it in kind of a classroom setting, which is another reason why I did it in short chapters, because I a little bit envisioned that, like, like a teacher may want to like pull out an excerpt and be like, let's discuss this one vignette and like what this means, kind of. And so I wanted it to be very like able to do that a little
Yeah.
bit. So that's kind of what I intended it for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that ability to take those short stories and have the examples with them also are very memorable as a reader, I think, too. It helps you remember the story. It helps you. I can tell you, I won't ever look at Truck Drivers the same again after reading your story. So I just thought the whole book was fascinating. Such a different and interesting topic. And congratulations on the success of your book, on being willing to tell your story. That's a big deal. And so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Abigail Olson, author of the book, The Hay Wagon. And before we close out, Abigail, what do you hope people learn or take away after reading your book?
I hope they feel a connection or something that they can relate to, and find humor and humanness in the story, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I definitely felt that way. And again, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been an amazing conversation with you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Create What You Speak podcast, brought to you by webtalkradio.net. You can also hear the podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting platform. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode of the Create What You Speak podcast, where we will continue to free our minds, expand our consciousness, and untangle those thoughts and patterns that keep us from living the life we desire. Check out my website, sloanfremont.com, to learn more.